Hey, it's Toby. In this talk, I'm going to share how change is not an event, it's a skill. So I'd like you to start by thinking about a change that you desire. Maybe that's something at work, or it could be something at home. And as I go through this talk, I'd like you to think about how what I share applies to your situation. So I help develop leaders and teams. I'm a professional coach with the International Coaching Federation. A little known fact about me is I've also performed at Glastonbury Music Festival. And I ship content to help you and your organization improve at tobysinclair.com. If you scan the QR code, you'll also find a whole host of other links that take you to materials and content that's relevant to this talk today. So typically when people talk about change, I see this event-driven thinking a lot, which is if X happens, then Y will happen. And we see this in organizations and in our personal lives. For example, when that leader goes to Scrum training, they'll finally get it. Or for example, once I move to the new job, I'll be happy. And when I trained as a professional coach, I took some of this thinking with me in the sense that you see these big professional coaches like Tony Robbins that talk about these kind of transformational moments where your life will suddenly change. Reality is that I've come to learn that actually change happens in a slightly different way, and that this kind of event-driven change, although it does happen, happens less often than another kind of change that I think is more important. And this quote, I think, sums up how I think about this different kind of change, this kind of gradual change that sneaks up of you. And then before you know it, you've actually created the change that you desired, but it was the small actions you took each day that led you to that, not the dramatic moment of transformation. And BJ Fogg also gives a really good way to describe how behavior change happens. The author of Tiny Habits, he says that change can happen in three ways. You can have an epiphany, change your environment, or change habits in tiny ways. And that really is the focus of today's talk, is about how can we change the environment and change our habits in tiny ways. Epiphanies and big moments, as I said, can happen, but we've got more control over the change if we focus on changing our environment and changing our habits in tiny ways. And this really relates to something called the locus of control. The locus of control really breaks into two. And if you've got an external locus, this means that your life happens to you rather than due to you. So you think of external events as driving your life. Whereas if you've got an internal locus of control, you determine your fate. And today I'm sharing skills that put change into your hands so that you can develop these skills and make change a reality in your life. So the first skill is around environment hacking. So this is shaping and designing your environment to match the goals and desires that you want. So we all know recently that our worlds have dramatically changed as we started to work from home. Our environments have been disrupted and change has happened dramatically around us. For many, it's been a challenge to really find a new way of working with all of our family needs and the things that are going on in our lives as work and home start to merge. The most successful people, though, I think, are the ones that have been able to apply what Wendy would call situational control. In Good Habits, Bad Habits, she describes that the most successful people that create positive changes that stick are those that have high degrees of situational control. They're able to shape and design their environments and the context in which they operate to best support the goals that they have. Another great example is from professional cooking. So a good example here in professional kitchens, chefs are really great examples of situational control and how they design their environment for automatic thinking. So this phrase mise en place what do I need to make this, is a great example where chefs design their environment and basically take their ingredients and organize them first. So then when they come to cook the meal, everything is so much easier and they can rely on automatic behaviors rather than trying to design the kind of environment as they go. Some examples from my life in terms of what I've done to adjust and respond to the situation. Here is my DIY standing desk that I've created, where after having some back pain, I decided to adjust my environment and experiment with a standing desk, which has been fantastic. Another example is walk and talks. Like everyone, I was struggling with Zoom fatigue, and I took it into my own hands and decided to actually start doing walk and talks on a regular audio channel rather than dialing into video. And another really simple thing is just adjusting meeting lengths and doing 25, 20-minute meetings. It's amazing. Those short 5-10 minute breaks between meetings really helps you refresh, take some notes, have a comfort break, and it makes a huge difference to your day. So all of these demonstrate that if you shift your locus of control to your internal area and experiment with environment hacking, you can really have dramatic effects. And it's my belief that the rate of change is directly influenced by the rate at which you experiment with your environment. So by experimenting with your environment, you create a better capability for you to create change within your life. So I'll take a pause here, and what I'd like you to think about is what's one thing that you can do to hack your environment so that, going back to the start of this talk, you can achieve the change that you desire. The next skill is what I call habit hacking, the ability to change behavior in tiny ways. And really, for anything to change, someone has to start acting differently. So what this means is that we need to really understand how behavior happens so that we can start to adjust and change it to achieve our goals. And often we think about behavior change happening in a slightly awkward way, in the sense that we tend to think if our thinking changes, it will change our behavior. And this is really anchored again upon this idea of event-driven change, where we think that if a certain event or way of thinking happens, will change how we behave. The reality is that changing behavior creates a change in thinking. And this model from John Schuch, who was one of the first American managers to work with Toyota, when he went to work with Toyota, he observed that Toyota applied the new model, change behavior to change thinking. So in an organizational context, if we want to change our organizational culture, we must start acting differently to get a change in that culture. We cannot think our way to a new behavior. And the best model I've found that really describes how behavior happens is the Fogg behavior model, which is from Tiny Habits. And BJ Fogg talks about behavior change. Behavior happens when motivation, ability, and prompt converge at the same moment. And the key takeaway from this model is that we need to focus on how we make behavior changes easy as possible to do. We can't rely on motivation because it's fickle and unreliable, and reminders only work if the behavior is easy for us to do and we're adequately motivated to do it. So what that means is, how can we make the behavior changes we desire as easy as possible to do initially? And there's a few different ways we can make behavior easier to do. These are different things that you can experiment with to make that behavior easier. For example, reducing the time it takes to do the behavior, reducing the mental effort that's involved, or reducing the physical effort. And by experimenting with these dials, it allows you to make that behavior change easier to do. And when you make it easier to do, you're more likely to do it. And over time, you'll start to form that into a new habit. A good example from my own personal life is about a year ago, I started to write book summaries. And the way I started is I actually started writing 1-sentence book summaries. So after I'd read a book, I would just take a moment to write down a very short sentence summary of it. And it's amazing what can happen if you plant behavior in the right areas. 1 year later, I've actually now written around 40 detailed book summaries that all started from me just writing down a short 1-sentence summary on a Post-it note. So this demonstrates that if you plant behaviors in the right areas, they'll grow dramatically over time. The challenge many people have is that time aspect. Behavior change only happens when you're consistent over a period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. And again, this debunks that idea around the event-driven thinking, in that really it's the small behaviors you perform over time that will gradually bring the results that you desire. So again, it's my belief that the rate of change is strongly influenced by the rate at which you can build or break habits. So what that means, if you want to create change in the world, you need to become an expert in how behavior happens. And once you can start to adjust and experiment with building and breaking habits, over time it becomes easier as you learn the techniques and the tools that allow you to do that. So again, I'll take a pause and think back to that goal and change that you want in your life. And think, how could you make the behavior easier to do? So think of one behavior that you could do to achieve your goal, and how could you make that as easy as possible to do initially? So in summary, rather than thinking about change as an event, start to think about change as a set of skills that you can develop. And if you develop these skills, you'll be ready for any why. If you'd like to develop these skills further and understand how habits form, then take part in Switch, my free 5-day habit program. Each day, you'll be given a short 5-minute exercise that will introduce you to the key ideas around habit formation and how you can start to make a positive change in your personal life and how you might start to apply those in an organizational setting too.